It's the 12th day of April, 2015, and this is the Radical Agnostic. I'm John, my co-host, as always, Mark.
Hello.
The stowaway guest, Bryan Richter.
Howdy.
And I am pleased, honored, and titillated to welcome a good friend, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, a new father, and a world traveler. Aaron B., welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
You actually approached me about this, and about 3 seconds into you talking, I realized that it was an amazing idea to have you on, and why hadn't I thought of that yet? You were saying before we started that you're listening to some Howard Stern to get prepared for this.
Yeah. I think he's a really good interviewer.
The king of all media.
The king of all media. Yeah, I mean,
self-proclaimed, but it's still true. It is true. I mean,
yeah, definitely.
Did you listen to any particular interviews of his?
Yeah, I listened to one with Madonna recently.
I heard that one.
I really didn't think it was that great. I think but I also think that they've both been around so long that they can kind of just I don't know. They just didn't seem to. She didn't really seem to take it too seriously, you know.
Yeah, they're both in that megastar category. I was surprised to learn that she's in the top 4 best-selling musicians of all time. It's like the Beatles, the Stones,
Michael Jackson, yeah,
and her. She's sold over 300 million records.
Oh, damn, wow. That's some pretty elite company though for. Damn.
Yeah.
I know that she was one of
she's
the
like the Oprah
most
of music.
well paid too, from a record company.
Yeah, she made
record sales. She makes.
She
made
percentage.
the most percentage of on CD sales, but still, it was only 35 cents each CD.
Oh God!
Wow.
So she didn't even make a cool 300 mil from those record sales.
No,
probably a lot less.
With that being said, though, there are some people that he hasn't been able to interview. One was Tom Cruise. I think is I don't think it'll ever happen. But
not gonna happen.
He was saying the other day I can't get Tom Cruise. That's the only reason he'd stay with the show. Maybe is to get some of the people he hasn't got before.
Yeah. He's such a fame whore though. And I wasn't gonna shit on Stern, but all he cares about is fame and money. I mean, that is it. I've heard him say stuff like he doesn't believe anymore that. There's underground artists like musicians who are really good. His thing is if they're not making money, they're not good. That's it. It's a simple equation for him.
So great bands just fucking poof appear on the map and that's it. They're signed immediately.
Well, I guess he would say that starting out maybe they haven't made money yet, but there's no such thing as a band that's been awesome for 20 years and hasn't made it big yet. There's no such thing as that for him. They just suck. They're losers. But anyway, I didn't want to shit on Stern, but the one thing to bring up is that he recently he proclaimed that all podcasters are losers. So this comedian Ari Shaffir was on Rogan and told Joe that Howard Stern had said that. And Joe was he was playing his cards right, man. I mean, anyone in show business, they know better than to cross Howard Stern.
Right.
So Joe was like, well, I just think he's a really smart guy and he's trolling. It's like a way of trolling. He knows that podcasting is getting big and so he's just kind of trying to piss people off and get people to listen to him and start a controversy. So then I listened to Stern listening to that and Stern was like, no, Joe's wrong. He's like, I really do think all podcasters are losers. As you all know, I like to use this show as a soapbox for my cockamamie theories about everything. And so before we get into anything serious with Aaron, there's a myth that I want to bust, and I can't do it with research because the research on this is actually completely.
Well, let's do it with conjecture.
Let's
get after that shit, man.
I don't need facts to tell a good story.
Right. So let that get in the way.
Form an opinion.
This is a good one because everyone I've ever told this to disagrees with me. So I'm in the zero.
Have I heard this already?
I think I've probably brought this up to you.
Okay.
It's pretty simple.
At least I already know where I stand.
everyone I've ever talked to about this, it's about alcohol. And here's the urban legend. It's that, dude, tequila makes me fucking fight, man. Or Jack Daniels will make me punch an old lady in the back of the head. Or, in other words, to boil it down, different kinds of liquor make you behave differently. And to me, it's just the most obvious correlation that isn't a causation. In other words, you drank a lot one night of a certain thing. You drank too much. You got drunk. You behaved in a way you regret. And ever after, you connect that behavior with that kind of liquor. Because I just don't believe... I mean, there's different things in different liquors, but I don't think they have effects on behavior, and there's no evidence that they do. It's just how much alcohol you drank. And maybe you didn't eat dinner that night, so maybe you had nothing in your stomach, so you got crazy drunk. You know what I'm saying?
It happens.
So, now, come on. I mean, tell me I'm wrong. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think you're wrong. Just because.
Which one is it for you?
Which one is it? Yeah.
Well,
Who's your guy, Beef? Come on, Jim, Johnny, Jack. Who's your guy, man?
well, I'm not saying that, the fighting thing, but I know the drunks are different. Like, if I drink tequila, it's more of an upper. It's not getting sloused and like barely able to function. Like if I drink tequila, I get like energy. I get like, and I'm alert. Well, I'm alert to still being drunk. You know what I mean? I'm like drunk, but I'm like not sleepy drunk. I'm not.
I might be able to believe that. I mean, maybe there's more sugar in different types of liquor.
Well,
sugar is a psychoactive.
Well, like you said, it's made out of different stuff too. Like I don't believe the whole. Oh, if you drink or eat the worm from the bottle of tequila, you're going to like trip out.
No.
I think usually that's you drank the whole bottle of tequila and then you eat the worm and you're like, oh yeah, I'm really tripping out, man.
Yeah, it was too late already by the time you got to the worm.
Yeah, we got some absinthe in college. We like ordered it from France because it was still illegal here. And yeah, my buddies... They just wanted it to be true that absinthe makes you trip and stuff. So we drank a bunch of it, and it's just like 150 proof liquor. It gets you intoxicated, and they were like pretending or claiming that they were seeing hallucinations and things.
Yeah, I've never experienced that, but I'm not going to say it doesn't happen because what about marijuana then? There's a ton of different strains of marijuana now, which some are supposed to be like body highs, some are head highs, some, make you just sit on the couch, some give you
I think
energy,
those are
supposedly.
largely bullshit too, honestly, but then there is some science behind the indica sativa divide. But the whole this kind super bubblegum crash something, it makes me feel this way. Yeah, I don't buy it.
You don't buy it.
No.
I think the good absinthe is in Czechoslovakia, though. Isn't that where like Hemingway went to drink it and all that
Well, it has
in
to have
Spain?
Wormwood.
It has to have wormwood
Yeah.
in it, which a lot of the absinthe now that you can get in the U.S. does not contain hardly any.
My
wormwood.
wife had a hallucinogenic experience. I mean, she's not here, so I can't. But we were talking about this 2 days ago, and she was saying she actually had a hallucinogenic experience in Spain, drinking when she was traveling through there in her teenage years. So
Did she describe what it was? It like she saw or heard things that
we
weren't
didn't
there?
really go into. It was hallucinogenic experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I can't answer. But like I said, I don't need facts to tell you my.
Well, I've always wondered this whole thing about the subjectivity of perception and the blind dreams thing that we talked about. I've always wondered if you could put alcohol in a pill, marijuana in a pill, and then let's say Vicodin, and you put them in 3 identical looking capsules, and they all had an amount of each substance roughly equal in it, the levels of the effects that it would give you, and say they all started working after 30 minutes exactly. Okay, so none of those factors are in play. And you took them, an experienced drug user took them, would you be able to tell which one was which? And I think the first reaction is, yeah, obviously I could tell the difference between being drunk and smoking marijuana or something. But I always wondered if you really could, and how distinctive those different feelings are. So clearly no one has anything to say.
Well,
I'm thinking about
Yeah.
that. I think I'd probably just
definitely
take off the
there's,
pills.
I mean, a difference between cocaine and alcohol. I mean,
Definitely.
there's
No, there's definitely a difference. But that's why I didn't pick cocaine to be in that group. Because it's that one, and
I think you definitely know the difference. I can't believe I wouldn't know the difference between being drunk and being high. I would have to think I would know the difference between.
You think?
And Vicodin, I'd start itching because I'm allergic to the opiates or whatever they put in it. So
you got to take that out of the occasion. But
well, the thing too is like with Vicodin. Most of the times that I've ever taken Vicodin, I was drunk.
Right.
So
you don't know exactly what it feels like.
Right. Like, I mean, the only time that I've ever taken Vicodin or anything like that is with being sober is like in the hospital. Like, or, after being at the dentist or something like that. So,
I
mean,
got
it feels
the Dilaudid
different.
in there.
Right. But I mean, most drugs for me that I've ever taken, I've also been drunk. So, like, to differentiate between, for me,
would be hard.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the alcohol.
What about it?
I'm
The different types?
Because did I disagree with you before?
I think you told me a story as like I said, everyone else I've ever brought this up to has a story.
Was it the malt liquor story that I told you?
I don't know. I thought it was...
Because they don't serve it in bars. Why don't they serve malt liquor in bars? Because you
Actually,
drink malt liquor, you get to fight, and that's the urban myth,
Well,
right?
generally they don't serve it in bars because they don't want
People
they
to
don't
be
want
fighting.
people getting that fucked up and
Right.
fighting and stuff.
Right.
Malt
But
liquor gets you
I've been
fighting.
in bars where they served it.
They
there
serve
was,
Mickey's, or do they serve malt
Yeah,
liquor?
there was malt liquor. I mean, Mickey's is malt liquor.
It's white boy malt liquor.
Right,
Mickey,
but I
yeah.
mean, it's
Tastes like Bud Light.
I've been in
does. It's not
places
good.
where they've had King Cobra 40s.
Oh wow.
Did you get in a fight?
No, But I've
Was
been
it
in
on
places-
tap?
No,
So
seen it on
Because
tap.
now, like taking a more
remember.
Put it in a 40-ounce bottle for you.
sorry, taking a more objective look at my long and illustrious drinking career. If most of the things that I took off my list, I gauged that like they came off my list because I got so wrecked that I got so sick, and then I associated
Right.
the smell. But
and that's a different thing.
if I really wanted to associate it with, I got in a fight or shit went sour, like that's pretty much alcohol.
yeah.
I don't,
in general.
that whole saying, I don't get in trouble every time I'm drinking, but every time I get in trouble, I'm drinking.
drinking.
Like
Yeah.
that's kind of my history with that
Yeah.
that drug.
Well, I had a girlfriend that told me that when I drank whiskey, I got violent.
Dude,
and
David Lee Roth
wanted
told
to
you
get in a
that.
fight.
Like, don't take your whiskey home, bro. He told you.
There's so
You
many...
fucking knew that.
But there's so many spurious correlations between things and behaviors that I just think this is one of them. I think it's bullshit. I don't believe that whiskey, that you can drink vodka all night and be fine, but if those had been whiskey drinks, then you'd be in jail.
Right.
For
Although I think different liquor probably affects people differently. I'm not saying that everyone that drinks whiskey is going to act like this, but there's probably some people. Just like I know there are people that I've met that like they drink 2 beers and they're automatically shit hammered.
right.
You know
But
what I
that's
mean?
just
And
a
then-
tolerance.
Well, no, it's not tolerance because then they can continue to drink for the next like 24 hours, like just straight on, and they'll stay the same shit hammered. They'll never pass out. They'll never, and it's like, well, I don't know what it is.
That's-
Like,
But that's happened to me.
A couple names have already come to mind as he's talking. Like I know those people.
That's happened to me though, sometimes and not
On
others.
2
And
beers?
it had to. If I have an empty stomach and I drink 2 kilt lifters, I'll feel.
no, I'm not talking about you'll be like, ooh, I'm kind of.
Oh, they're shit
I'm
faced.
saying you're like,
Yeah, no, that's not me.
Okay, maybe I don't know those people.
Well, all right.
Now that you've clarified,
I think I can agree with you that different liquors do affect people differently. Okay, but what I think that has to do with what's called expectation.
you don't think it has a physical characteristic?
I
at all?
don't.
So,
No, and so like I said, there's
It's like
no.
how some people are allergic to.
So you're saying it's like a
seafood or-
self-fulfilling prophecy. As the guy lifts the whiskey shot, he's like, "Here it fucking comes,
Hey,
man!
and you're expecting it now.
All
Here's,
or nothing, brother."
yeah, and
Yeah.
maybe if you already if you already correlate whiskey with bad behavior and you've decided to drink whiskey anyway that night, you've decided to behave poorly, haven't you?
So you were a fool. You're just letting yourself off the hook.
You're giving yourself a belief structure.
I'll buy that.
And the studies on that exact question, there aren't any. But the studies of effects on alcohol effects in general, I'll just read this quote. Studies of alcohol effects on motor and cognitive functioning have shown the individual differences in responses to alcohol are related to the specific types of effects that drinkers expect. In general, those who expect the least impairment are least impaired, and those who expect the most impairment are most impaired under the drug. Moreover, this same relationship is observed in response to placebo. So that's pretty interesting stuff about, and they do this. They'll put you in a lab and they'll give you placebo liquor, which I don't know how they make that taste right.
Right.
Like what isn't alcohol that tastes like alcohol?
Non-alcoholic beer is
They're
the
probably
only thing I
serving
can
you-
think
Yeah,
of.
that's what I was thinking of.
Probably
Like,
serving you a
some
bunch
sort
of
of.
girly drinks, the juice and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like
Oh yeah.
some kind of rum punch type deal.
But it's hilarious to me that there's people in these labs
And
and
then-
they're getting drunk on placebos.
No, right, but then even with that, with the rum punch, they can put like the imitation rum flavoring in it, and so it's not. Then there's a little bit of alcohol in it, but it's,
Marginal.
yeah.
So this is a bunch of nonsense. Let's get into the meat.
Meat.
Aaron, thank you so much for being on the show. How do you describe yourself? Are you an alcoholic? What are you? What's the terminology? How do we get started into this here?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I identify as someone who's in recovery, and I had a bunch of experiences as a teenager and into my early 20s, where alcohol just absolutely consumed my life, and I lost several relationships over it, and I'd look in front of a mirror. I think this is like the grunt of it is like I'd look in a mirror and swear to myself I was never going to take a drink again, or really wholeheartedly with everything I knew, like I knew my name was Aaron, said I was going to stop, and no sort of fixed equation of circumstance could seem to fit that bill. And so that's, I mean, I do identify as an alcoholic.
So how much were you drinking? How often?
Oh boy. Well, let's see. I think. Well, I in the end was like more like a beer drinker. And it would. I mean, just to feel right in the morning, it would be at least a 32-ounce a High Life. As soon as they started selling alcohol, I'd have my correct change that I'd either take from a roommate's room, or something, or had from the night before, on the counter at 6 o'clock with the bottle right there, so I could just duck in the alley by 6:02 and take a big swig and feel all right.
Wow.
Like I could look the world in the eye type of deal. Yeah.
Got you to normal.
Yeah.
And then throughout the day,
exactly.
you would drink more and more.
Yeah.
So what was it to the point where when you stopped drinking, did you go through DTs? Did you have to do it medically?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd get DTs, audio. I'd hear things, and visual too, and also feel things physically. I remember I was laying in a detox bed and at a center here in town, and I was laying down, and I could have sworn to you there were like animals walking around me. I mean, it was the craziest thing. I heard like all kinds of punk rock music coming out of the light fixture. I mean, it was just a really wild trip. And
I've seen the other side of that quite a few times working detoxing at the hospital.
So what did I mean? There's a lot of phrases associated with recovery
Sure.
and 12-step programs. Was there a rock bottom? Did you hit that? Was that a thing that happened to you?
That was my question. Like a single event where you were like, "Fuck, I'm done, man. I'm closing this fucking door."
Yeah. I think I was living in this tent behind a trailer park in Idaho Falls, and I had kind of gotten some money in a job, and I was supposed to move into this guy's basement who let me stay there every once in a while. And I had this money in my hand to either pay him the rent or to come back to Tucson, where I had some experience with some sobriety. And I think right then is when I made a moment of clarity, if you will, kind of hit like. I ended up coming back to Tucson. Really, the first time that I ever kind of tried to get sober, if you will, I kind of ended up here by dumb luck. I was in a relationship with another girl. It wasn't working out, and I didn't have any money. I couldn't go to any sort of fancy treatment center, so they just took me down to the detox. So, but I think this final time, that it worked out. It was a moment of clarity. I just had this money, and And yeah, just kind of took a Greyhound back to Tucson and had enough to not have a seizure on the bus, on the way back. So
you entered recovery, and is that you haven't looked back since then, or when was that? How old?
Sure, yeah, I came back to Tucson, and I stayed sober for a month. I drank one last time, and then I've been sober ever since for about 8 years now. Yeah,
8 years.
Yeah, so October 17th of 06 is.
So that's how long almost that we've known you.
Yeah, which is it's kind of wild. Yeah, absolutely. Like
it's a little longer, I think, because we were there for a while before you came, right?
A year or two, a
couple
couple years.
Yeah, a couple of years. So I think I've been doing.
We're talking about, for those who don't know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Bryan and I do that, and Aaron is also an advanced practitioner himself. So that's how we know him.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think I've been doing it for about 6 years now.
Yeah.
A little over 6 years. So I think I'd been around for 2 years. Yeah, when I came in.
Okay.
Now, one of the confusing distinctions for you're not a spokesperson for Alcoholics Anonymous, but you have been through 12-step programs. There's some confusion in there in the terminology and the doctrines of 12-step programs concerning the difference between problem drinkers and non-problem drinkers, right? So is it possible that guy A can drink 10 beers a night and guy B can drink 10 beers a night, and one of them is an alcoholic and one is not? Is that a thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, sure. Yeah, I think what can happen is at some point one of those guys crosses some sort of line where they can't stop on their own willpower, and then 10 just turns into whenever the night ends or whenever really maybe they pass out or something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
So I was trying to. My friend Abe was here this weekend, and he's been through a 12-step program as well. He's sober, and I was trying to ask him, what is the difference between an alcoholic and someone who drinks, who's not, and We got some interesting answers out of that, but basically he said it's why you drink. It's not how much you drink or what happens to you when you drink, as much as why you drink. That's the distinction between the alcoholic and the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. I think there's many different factors, I think when I take a drink of alcohol, something happens inside of my body that might not happen to Bryan, yourself or Mark. It's just I just kind of want to keep going and keep drinking. And at some point, maybe, that wasn't always the case. I'd just have a couple and then it'd be over. But I kind of crossed this line and it becomes sort of like an obsession, how I can one day drink like a normal person, is kind of the thing that I chase. And through all sorts of circumstances, maybe trying to meet the right girl or live in the right place, try to put A plus B to equal, drinking normally, if you will, or even being happy. That just never sort of seems to be the case.
Right.
That's never the deal. That never happens. Yeah.
So during the time before this 8-year period, you would stop for a while and then you would try to just drink casually, and it just didn't work. It would always fall apart.
Yeah, and in the end, I mean, there was no stopping. I mean, it towards the end, it was like I completely and fully understood myself to know that if I drank, it was going to be an awful experience, or something horrible was going to happen. Or, I mean, I'd have, you spoke of a moment of clarity earlier that one will have. I knew very clearly that I was affecting people, that this was a problem, yet this is the insanity of it. I knew myself to be an alcoholic, but I drank anyways.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, I continued to keep drinking.
And that addict behavior that goes along with it, the lying to people you care about, right? And ruining relationships you mentioned, that's all comes along with it, right?
Yeah, sure. I think it comes with, you trying to get what you need. When you know you need to drink a certain amount so you don't have a seizure in the morning, or, you need to just feel like, okay, I can look you in the eye, or something like that. I was thinking about this one girl I lived with, and I used to take her books, and I used to, when she would go to work, and I'd go walk down to Bookman's, and then I'd go sell them, and then I'd go walk to Plaza and get, a couple 40s and just, be able to be all right.
Yeah.
I mean, so stuff like that did happen, but in my heart of hearts, the thought process was kind of you know, one day I'll get over this and I'll make this up to her and like I'll replace these books or whatever. But I absolutely have to do this right now, or else, you know, I'm not going to feel okay. And I don't think that's always the case either. I think some people are just straight malicious, you know, like you know, and things like that. But that was, I mean, that'd be like an example.
That makes sense. Go ahead.
He convinced. Darren's the guy who convinced me I wasn't an alcoholic. Because the night that I heard John say, he's like, has Bryan had a drink yet? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, oh, yeah, because once you get that first one in him, it's done. But that's the hard one to get in.
Yeah.
And I was telling him that. I said, you know, when I start drinking, I know where it ends. I'm going to be drunk. Like, I just hand off my keys now. And then you said, yeah, but, like, you're not hiding liquor in the closet and lying to Christine.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it's not affecting your relationships. And you wake up tomorrow and you don't do it again. Like,
right.
You pay your price for it and you move on. And you're like, that's kind of the difference between a hard drinker and an alcoholic. Like, you do turn it off. You're not telling lies. You're not hiding it. It's not affecting your life and your relationships. You don't, like, tonight, the people that are your friends are still your friends tomorrow.
Right.
Like, you didn't piss them all off and do a bunch of crazy shit. You didn't steal anything from them next week because you're still on a 2-week bender. You know, it's like, that's not how it happened. But that's not how it always was. Like, I went through 12-step programs. I did so much dumb shit before I got smart about anything.
Yeah, which is kind of confusing because you kind of are representing some kind of middle gray area then.
It's not where I'm always at, isn't it? Like, I'm never going to fucking fit in anywhere.
It's all dependent on just the individual, whether someone's an alcoholic or not. And it's up to you to decide.
You think it's chemistry, like it's physiology?
Yeah, but I'm trying to get to what that distinguishing
is it
feature
physiology?
is.
Like brain chemistry? Because that's all the shit they taught me in treatment, like dopamine.
I don't know if it's that.
Serotonin.
Because, you know, that's just like environment too, like how you were, what you went through as a kid, what your parents did. You know, I think there's all kinds of different factors that come into whether you're an alcoholic or not, or a drug addict or whatever. But I think usually it's most people with drugs and alcohol, they start off and they're doing it in their teens because it's fun, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't think I've ever heard anybody that got into it some other way. I think everyone starts out doing it socially with other people. It's fun. Whatever.
Yeah, my friends were doing it.
Right.
And then for some people it becomes it's no longer fun. And that's what I've always thought is if you're drinking or doing whatever kind of drugs and it's no longer fun for you, you have to do it, then that's when you have a problem.
Yeah. To stop, you have to do it to stop feeling horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just to maintain, just to like be able to live and not want to kill yourself or not want to.
And this is a question,
hide from the world or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And so when I took a drink, you know, I all that stuff went away. Like I felt okay. Like it felt like it was my solution to live life, I think is a good way to put it. You know, and it felt like I could kind of attack life, you know, and like, you know, move through life and things like this. But I don't know how to answer your question because I'm not sure how.
You don't know how I feel.
I don't know how you feel. I do know though that I felt like, I mean, if you will, like a big spiritual breath was taken when I took a drink. Like, okay, like I can face life. You know, I got a plan.
I've never done it, but I imagine if you shoot heroin, you feel awesome.
Yeah.
Right? Like you feel like you're happy. Like, or if you take ecstasy or something, you feel happy and joyful. So I don't know if you've ever done any of those kind of drugs or if you've ever had a moment of feeling like elated and super happy. So I was just wondering if alcohol had a comparable effect as those kind of experiences.
Well, and I think that's what a lot of people chase is like, we just missed the mark, you know. I think is what happened for me is like, so I take that drink and I feel, you know, great, and I feel like I can look the world in the eye, but then every after that is just being a sloppy drunk, you know. What I mean? I think it's the same for people who shoot heroin. They shoot heroin once and they feel this great feeling and they're chase the dragon. You know, they're constantly trying to chase that feeling again. Mm-hmm. So with that respect, I relate like that. Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple roads to go down with this though. There's the one of the controversial things about AA and 12-step programs and modern psychology in general is this idea of alcoholism as a disease. So a lot of people have a problem with this because they say you're medicalizing, and it's not a word, but you're giving a diagnosis or an official name to something that that there's no evidence yet that there is a genetic.
Right.
I've gotten
There's
in it
no
over
gene
this.
for alcoholism.
I've been in it with this about this too. So
Yeah,
about this
right,
subject.
right. And the thing, and I think what you, Bryan, the problem you have, and that I've had with it also in the past, is that it removes personal responsibility,
Yeah,
right?
That's what bothers me about it. Yeah.
And this is what bothers. So, like Doug Stanhope had a big debate with Jim Norton on Opie and Anthony about AA and about alcoholism. And Stanhope was saying, in AA, for example, they tell you one of the big things is learning that you don't have control.
You're powerless over alcohol, and that your life has become unmanageable. Yeah.
Right. And that leads to the whole higher power thing, which is another controversial aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So, and feel free to disagree with the sort of thing.
No, yeah, sure, yeah.
So
I've heard these things before.
Yeah, sure.
Because I have a question about the higher power.
Well,
Powerlifting,
let's not get
yeah.
into the higher power
Yeah.
yet, but definitely remind me if I don't bring it back up.
I just want to remember it for later.
But the
for him.
disease aspect.
Yeah.
Is alcoholism a disease, or what are the benefits of portraying it in that way rather than saying, buck up, son,
Right,
fight
right,
this
right,
thing,
right.
beat this thing.
Yeah, maybe there's something in the middle. Like, for whatever reason, I think it's the American Medical Association, the AMA, right? They said that alcoholism is a disease. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous, people in recovery, to my knowledge, I don't think they have a lobby in Washington that looks to get things called this. You know what I mean? So I think from
I think they do have a lobby. But I don't think they're getting it
like a centralized
called a disease. I don't think. I think they have a lobby because a lot of with court system, you have to go to AA if you get
I think that kind of
arrested for
happened though,
certain things.
word of mouth. Judges just started realizing that shit's working for people, so we're going to hold you accountable in some way, and
but I know,
by making you hold yourself accountable on a day-to-day basis, because that's when
but I know
needed
people
that,
who got arrested for things completely not connected to drugs or alcohol, and then they had to go through AA classes, pay these fines, pay this money to go through the courses, and then even with DUIs, with them keep dropping the percentage of alcohol that'll cause you to get a DUI. It gets lower and lower all the time.
Right.
So
that's like MAD, and I don't know if AA too or not, but I know that they're a big proponent of doing that and getting those laws passed. Yeah. So that's what I meant by lobbying the government.
I'm wondering if part of it too was to get it covered by health insurance so that you could go to treatment for it, or if because the withdrawal is so fucked up that you have to get medical treatment and they wanted it to be covered, if it was something in the language that made them.
Well, it's a way of sentencing people to less time in prison and instead assigning them to some kind of activity that's rehabilitative, which I think
especially
is
since
really
it's
good.
like the government collects taxes from a fucking addictive drug that has horrible consequences on society. They just fucking unleash it on you, and they're like, "Oh, you can do it, but if you fuck up while you're on it, we're going to crush you."
But then again, I don't think anyone here wants it to be illegal either.
No,
we don't want to go back to prohibition because we're already...
I'm definitely not saying that. I mean, we just did a shot before we started the show, so I'm digging that.
So, Aaron, the disease designation for alcoholism, has that been beneficial to you, and the idea of giving up control? Because a skeptic would say, dude, me, Bryan, and Mark just took a shot. You go to bars. I've seen you in bars all the time. You never take a sip. You buy people drinks. You're the first guy to bring a bottle of liquor as a gift. So that you do have control, right? The skeptic would say, look, man, you have a lot of control. Like you're more than most people, I can't go to a bar and not order a drink,
But that doesn't make it not a disease. Like I've got diabetes, but I control what I ingest.
Okay, but here's my point though.
But eat cookies,
but there's a medical.
But I don't have to. But I can give you cookies, or you know what I mean.
Right.
But there's a medical side to diabetes where your blood sugar drops to this point, and then you go into
there's
a
a medical
coma.
side to drinking too. Like it affects your body,
but not to alcoholism.
Yeah. Well,
because alcoholism is the
you,
disease, but heavy drinking isn't necessarily.
What I'm saying is, by a personal choice, if you wake up tomorrow, you can't wake up and say, I'm just not going to have diabetes anymore. I'm fucking done with it. Where as a drinker, as an alcoholic, you wake up the next day and you say, today I'm not having a drink, and therefore I'm not going to be sick.
But right, you guys don't say I'm not an alcoholic anymore. Right. You say I'm still an alcoholic, right? I'm just recovering.
That's what I'm saying. But it does involve a choice. You can't wake up tomorrow and say, fuck my insulin, fuck my diet, I don't have diabetes anymore, I'm moving on.
But he's saying he can say, I won't eat sugar. He can choose that. Right. But he still has a disease.
You still have the disease, man. If you pick up sugar and start eating, you're still going to have the pathology is still there.
Right, but then, if I do my diet long enough and lose the weight, there's a chance that I'm not going to have diabetes anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? That has happened with people. So it's I see where you're coming from and what you're saying, but at the same time, like I think the disease aspect of alcoholism is sort of similar to mental illness. It's like a lot of people don't think that mental illness is really like a disease.
Right.
It's kind of like a lot of people think, why don't you just think normally? Why don't you
quit being
depressed?
Right.
Just get up.
So again, though, we're going back to brain chemistry then, right? Serotonin, dopamine,
right.
Neurotransmitters,
right?
Which I could buy. That's what they told me in treatment. You're more susceptible to this because of whatever levels you have or how you process those chemicals, and alcohol makes you release more of those chemicals, and maybe you crave that, like you're deficient in those. So that would be a pathology, because that's the same thing. I mean, I'm not going to say I understand how that all works in mental health, but I know those are the things they medicate to get people feeling.
But I also have a question too, is like, so when it comes to something that's a mental illness, this is, what we're talking about aside, like depression, is it something where they take your blood and they say, here's the equation, or is it all the person coming saying, hey, these are the symptoms that I'm experiencing? Right. So in that way, maybe what we're talking about with alcoholism, it could be the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's self-reported. I mean, you have depression if you feel like hell and you're sad and you can't do anything and you want to die for.
Yeah, it's like one of those check-off lists.
There's symptoms you can see.
When you wake up in the morning, are you like joyful about getting out of bed and going to work? Are you same thing with like, how often do you drink? Do you drink when you're happy? Do you drink when you're sad? Do you drink when you're celebrating? Drink when you're depressed? Yeah. So it's like
but Aaron, for you, was it valuable to give up control? And now we can move into the higher power debate. But
sure,
was that valuable for you, or?
Well, I think up until when I got sober, it was pretty clear that I was powerless over alcohol. Right, like I couldn't, and like the way it was, I mean, I would. Here's the deal. This is like an example of how I was powerless. Like I went to county jail, I don't know how many times. I'd always spend 3 months there. I'd spend 4 months there. I don't know how I didn't end up in prison, but I would sit in there and I'd get healthy and I'd do my push-ups, through my deck and get well and get right. And I would every day swear I wasn't going to take a drink when I got out of there. Like I very clearly saw, like I knew I was in here because of what I was doing out there drinking. And it was like I would walk out of the door, of the jail, and my buddy Scotty would come pick me up. And by the time I had gotten from the mission all the way out to the east side, something would have happened in my mind that said, Aaron, if you didn't run if you didn't coast through that stop sign, the cop would have never pulled you over. You never would have had to run from him. You never. And so like this whole some kind of twist in my mind came up that like all of a sudden by the time I'd spend 4 months in jail, but by the time I got from one end of town to the other, I was in Scotty's apartment having a beer. What I mean? And it's like that is. I
can buy that.
That's kind of like my experience. Is how I relate to powerlessness.
Yeah.
Not so much as it's like this. I'm a weak person, or like this bottle has control. It's like, look, something goes on with me that doesn't go on. Like if Bryan spent 3 months in jail, he'd probably
would not
say,
drink that day.
And that's the difference that we're talking about. This hard drinker is like at some point, if I came to you or any of you guys and said, look, like you got to cut back drinking because your liver's going and your heart's going to fail, you'd say, okay,
yes,
I'm done. And that would be it, right? Yep. Well, I'd be like, well, do I really need all of my liver? Or some kind of process would start happening in my mind.
Repair itself, and I can start back in like 6 months.
Yeah, exactly.
My first sponsor,
can I get a transplant?
My first sponsor called that. They told me to pick one that would be a jerk. So I got this old guy. He'd been sober for like 70 years. He told me that's stinking thinking, and it leads to stinking drinking.
Oh my god!
But
I can buy that though, man, because
I get it, you know.
and it's rationalizing. You rationalize yourself into a fucking alcoholic crisis, just like you can emote yourself into one.
And I don't know if you've ever been addicted to something.
Oh yeah,
but I've experienced maybe just the preliminary steps of that, and it scared me so bad that I would stop whatever was tempting me like that. And I hated that feeling of not having control over something and needing it. So, I mean, I can buy that, because what you went through and what alcoholics go through, it is different than what most of us go through when it comes to substances like alcohol. We don't go through that. Like, we don't feel that need, and we don't get out of jail and then go do it again. Mm-hmm. So,
or even one crazy night at a party and you're like, I'm going to stop for a while. It doesn't have to, and that's the other thing, is it doesn't have to be jail.
Just a bad hangover.
I mean? Yeah, just a bad hangover, but you do it anyways. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And see, there's
a spectrum, right?
In that sense, the disease designation makes sense to me.
Jail did it for me, man. I was looking at getting tried as an adult for a lot of felonies, and so I went into the diversion program and straightened my shit out, because it was I didn't want to go. My friend didn't go into diversion. He did 10 years. So that's about what I would have been looking at, and I didn't want to do 10 years.
And in defense of the disease designation, there's no such thing as heart disease, is there? Medically, it's not a thing. I looked it up, so I know. There's no heart disease. Isn't a disease. It's just that you have heart problems because of other issues, like high cholesterol or
congestive heart failure. It's like congestion or hardening of the arteries.
There's a bunch of different
atherosclerosis.
There's a bunch of different actual conditions that lead to heart failure or heart problems, and then
but heart
if you
disease
have any
itself
of them,
is just kind of like a general term that all that shit's lumped under.
Right.
Yeah.
So in that sense, calling alcoholism a disease does make sense, and so I see the other side of it.
Well, if you're talking,
but I'm not sure that's essential for me to like stay sober. You know what I mean?
You don't need that concept.
Yeah, like I said, like I want to be like real clear. Like I think that's something the AMA came up, talked about. You know what I mean? Like there's in certain literature it alludes to it, but like I mean, in recovery based meetings, you'll hear all kinds of stuff. You'll hear people say, "I have a disease." You hear people say, "I'm a freaking leprechaun." You know what I mean? Like you hear all, you hear like the whole weird. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's. So for some people it's different, but in my own experience, I think.
Well, I think by designating it as a disease, I mean there is some people that then try to use it as like not being responsible for their own actions. But I think also when you designate it as a disease, then you can get government funding.
See, that's what I was saying.
In Boston, you can do that. You can say you can go on disability for alcoholism.
Wow!
I actually know a guy who's living there in Boston right now.
And I wasn't even going to go into that, but I just meant like treatment. Like you can,
your health insurance will pay.
Your health insurance might pay for treatment.
Absolutely.
If it's not a disease, it's just like fuck you.
They can get it into the DSM or whatever.
Right. So I mean, like I said, I think it's a disease in the same way that mental illness is a disease, I think it's a real disease. But I think you kind of have you have control too, and you definitely have control over how you act even when you are drunk, like. You know what I mean?
So what do you, Bryan, I mean, as a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps type of guy on this subject, what do you think? Are you still in that camp? Like, just do it, just change? Or do you see the value with things like depression or suicidal ideation?
Well, I wouldn't have gotten sober by myself. There's no fucking way it would have worked for me. I went to AA for longer than they told me to. I'll tell you that. Like, I won't say how long I kept going, but I went a lot longer than the court ordered me to, and I still think about a lot of this shit. I talked about there, like a lot of the stuff that I learned from those people, and I looked at a lot of examples of friends of mine and just like where I could have been, like the guys I was hanging out with, where they ended up as opposed to where I ended up. And I didn't set the fucking world on fire, but I didn't end up where they did. I have a happy life. I don't for the most part damage my relationships. I mean, I get on people's nerves because I fucking talk a lot and I'm opinionated, but I don't, like the people that I love, for the most part, they love me back. You know, it's.
I think we're getting somewhere actually with this because,
But I couldn't have done it by myself.
I just had this like really funny image of like Bryan going to like recovery meetings and being like, "Okay, I'll drink normally," like just being in there. Like, I swear to God, if I never have to come back, I'll drink normally.
I was super serious when I was in there, though, because I needed it to live. Like,
honestly, though, it sounds like he got a lot more out of it than that. And here's some really fascinating research. Okay,
it's not finite, which is great. It's. I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, it's not like a finite thing. Like it's not for one specific person that maybe necessarily, because you do hear stuff like that where people will come in, it changes them in some way, and then they just stop going. So there's clearly like a spectrum.
Yeah,
but if I had a problem drinking again, or I'd go back there. Like, I wouldn't ask anybody,
right.
like, oh, what should I do? I'd just go back. I'd probably fucking call him at this point, honestly. I'd be like, dude, like...
In other words, it's effective.
Yeah, it worked for me. That's the only thing that worked for me. And I didn't want to hear those fucking doctors talking to me. They were full of shit. You don't know what I'm talking about. You never did this. Mm-hmm. How do you know how to quit? Like, how do you know what my life's like? You drive a fucking Mercedes. You go to sleep in a house that you have to punch a key code to get in. You got guards at the gates of your complex. Man, I live in the hood. I don't come from the same life as you. When's the last time you did cocaine, Doc?
Effectiveness.
I didn't relate to them.
The effectiveness of NA, AA, and these type of groups, we know that they work at least for some people, so they are effective to some extent. The question of explanation for that, why is that the case, is interesting. And when you look at the research, some really fascinating stuff comes up. For example, for decades, they taught people that basically mankind is like this idiotic sort of animal, savage creature who, if you give him the drugs, he'll take the drugs until his heart explodes. So they had rats in a cage, and they gave them a water bottle with cocaine in it. And I don't know if you guys have heard this famous experiment. Water bottle with cocaine, water bottle with water. And the rats would just hit that button for the cocaine, and it would keep coming, and they'd keep doing it, and they would explode, and they would die. So for decades, they taught people, look, rats are like humans in a lot of ways, actually. And so this is how humans are. If you give them the stuff, the happy juice, they'll take it until they die, and it's that simple. Well, then, and that sounds like, it really makes sense. It's kind of convincing if you don't really think about it too hard. Because if you do think about it, these rats are sitting in a steel cage with no other rats, with nothing to do, right? So the really awesome part of this research is when they replicated the experiment and they put some rats in the original conditions in these horrible cages with no stimulus, and they put other rats in cages with other lady rats and little balls and little puzzles to solve and things to run on. And what do you think happened? The majority of the rats in the stimulated environment did a little cocaine, had a crazy night, and never touched it again. And that means so much to me. That is so telling that there's this social aspect to this issue. It's all about intellectual stimulation, social relationships. So, Aaron, let's say maybe there's a genetic component or a physiological component to alcoholism. But let's assume with the research, or I could read a quote to this effect, that only accounts for about half of the sort of extreme effects of alcohol on an alcoholic. So the other half, do you have to have gone through, do you have other issues? And I think you alluded to something about problems you had in your life. You said you were angry, or I don't remember the phrase you used, but was the drinking there to fix something else? In other words, were there other problems emotionally and environmentally that contributed to you becoming an alcoholic? Were you in that stainless steel cage with no social stimulus and no intellectual exercise, and did that lead to the addiction?
I mean, that's a great question. I've just seen alcoholism, or people in recovery from all sorts, from any different race, social class, neighborhood, the whole thing. You see that guy. You actually see the guy with the Mercedes. You know,
do.
and it's like
I was in treatment with him. He was on
yeah,
coke.
and,
But
yeah, exactly.
It's the
And
same guy.
he spills a martini, or something like that, and like ruins himself in a social situation, and then it's over. He needs
That's
help.
rock bottom.
You know what I mean? You
Right.
get guys like me living in a tent, in Idaho. That's rock bottom. So I don't know if I can answer your question, but what I would tell you is that there are a lot of people I think in recovery that have a lot of have had a lot of traumatic experience, as a kid. But to be honest, to answer your question, I really don't know.
Right.
Like you need like a psychologist or a
Well, even they
psychiatrist,
don't know. And a
And
lot of research
yeah.
has been done on this, and I was reading it, and there's nothing conclusive out there.
Right. Yeah. And my short answer, like if I had an answer, would probably be like no. You know what I mean? I think what ended up happening was like I was just so consumed, and if we get to the other parts of this, is like I was so consumed by self. You know what I mean? At some point, I was just consumed. My own ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which are the guiding force of my life, were just so pointed inwards. And like I don't know when that happened, because I remember being a little kid, and I remember having this iguana Rex, and I'd look at him, and he'd look at me, and everything was perfect. You know what I mean? I was just so at peace. I felt a very natural comfort. And so kind of to answer your question, I don't know if some traumatic experience happened where that shut closed. All of a sudden I'm in first grade and I'm just hyper consumed about what trapper keeper I have and what this person thinks about me. And
Right.
am I worried? Am I going to get into the right school or whatever? And it's just happened at such an accelerated pace that the only thing that seemed to unlock that in like those ideas, that were just so fast was a drink, and it gave me that sense of peace, it gave me a sense of comfort. So I don't know when that happened or if that has something to do with it, but that's kind of like what my experience has been. So when I come into like a recovery program, work some steps or have this, alteration in my thought process as the result, and kind of lean on the experience of other people, which is kind of what you're talking about with these other rats. You know what I mean? Everything seems a little bit easier.
Right.
It seems like, hey, you know what? There's a sense of maybe hope. Like I can get through this.
That's the direction I'm taking this in speculatively, is that Bryan had this good experience and he went longer than he had to, and these groups work for you and many other people. What I'm saying is that the social component of the groups is key. In other words, forming and forging relationships with other human beings who you can have empathy with because they've been through something similar. In other words, empathy and human relationships being an integral part of mental health and leading you to a place. Because if it's genetic, I mean, you're still the same guy. So
right.
why aren't
Right.
you forced to go guzzle that bottle of Knob Creek? Because you found a way. Some hole has been filled, right? So where you don't need that anymore. And the program, I think you give a lot of credit to the program for that.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm just trying to find out what it is about the program that cures people.
Well, and I'm not so sure. Well, and I think a lot of it has to do with the experience of those who came before me. Who I like when I sit down in one of these places or a meeting hall and I hear someone speak their experience. It's like I relate to them on some other level that I can't explain. And going back to that kind of feeling trapped by those like ideas and I was in a meeting hall and I was brand new and they tell you things like, pick up the chairs and, do some service work and things. I was cleaning these ashtrays and like, I thought my problem was so absolutely complex that it would never be solved. But there was this really sweet old lady and I was washing them and it was no like, brilliant thing she said to me. She just looked at me and she just said, how are you doing? What's going on with you? What do you want to do? What are you trying to do here? And it was like the first time I had like a real conversation with another human being in several years because I'd just been in a hole drinking, you know what I mean? And like kind of just kind of trapped, if you will, by these ideas,
Yeah,
So,
that's a great example.
yeah.
It seems to line up with what I'm saying. That's an experience of empathy with somebody else.
And I think that's part of it. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of other stuff that needs to come up, but I think that's one of the most key components that helped me kind of just shift back onto that track, if you will.
See, I think what got me, not only that was a big deal for me, like seeing other people who had been in even worse spots that I had been because of it. Because I thought like I was screwed. I already screwed up my whole life, man. I can never do anything. I'm not going to be successful. Like I've already fucked it all up. And I saw these people that had already, they fucked it up worse than I had. And they were successful. They had made it through. But then it took a step further for me because I think the 12-step programs, they make you take some personal responsibility.
Absolutely.
When you do that moral inventory, that is it step 4?
Mm-hmm.
That's as far as I got. I'm here to tell you, man. But I think if you get halfway through that thing, you've done all right. That's not an easy thing to do. I'm still doing. But I'm probably still working on step 4.
Yeah,
man.
I mean,
Honestly, I am.
But think of how the steps correspond with like basic human values that everyone should be involved in, like taking a moral inventory or apologizing for things you've done. Like how important is that for everyone?
But
it's almost a rite of passage, and most of us never do it. It's just an AA thing.
Well, I think he touched on it too, because at some point he said everything turned inward. Like
exactly.
he got so involved in himself, and that's where I was. Like I couldn't see past my big ass nose. That's as far as I could see, and it took other people who had been in the same situation relating it to me relating to them, feeling that empathy, like, oh, I'm not the unique hero. I'm not the fucking hero I thought I was. There's a lot of people who have the same stuff going on, and I think it's and I need to start looking out. Like the shit I'm doing affects other people, and that's what it helped me realize. Like that I was all in. Like everything was pointing back towards me.
All of that. See, I'm trying to boil it down. That's my natural tendency is to give it like a overall philosophical sort of summary. And it seems that community is this thing that we lack generally in urban and suburban life in America. And that it's a big factor. It's a big part of why 12-step programs and groups work. I mean, like AA, for example, it's so not structured. You know, I've heard it be described as a anarchy, right? It's sort of each group is its own cell. They have the big book and they have the 12 steps, but it's not super rigid as to how the meetings proceed and things like that. So the only explanation for me as to why it does work in some cases is the community aspect and the personal changes that causes you to go through as a result. So
I'll buy that.
One thing that kind of makes people roll their eyes at AA and 12-step is all the dudes and ladies outside smoking, chain smoking, and drinking coffee. Okay, we got 2 psychoactive, physically addictive drugs there, nicotine and caffeine, and you know,
you gotta have something, right?
Well, that's true. I think addiction covers a lot of more bases than people want to acknowledge. You know, and a lot of it is because drug and alcohol addiction is more of a negative in our society.
Social stigma.
You can drink all the coffee you want, and unless you're like chattering nonstop to like people you don't know, you're really not going to get a negative in your life from it, or even now smoking
you're gonna get
is
some
becoming,
bad breath, brother.
Right?
But it's so arbitrary, isn't it? I mean, smoking is the most dangerous addiction you can have. Period. Bar none. No one can argue.
Right,
but not socially.
But it's not socially.
Yeah, but you kind of there's more of a pariah status to smokers now. Like,
yes.
Well, no, now
in America, yeah,
but it's still not as much of a pariah as drugs.
Yeah,
like I mean, you'll get thrown in jail for having drugs on you,
and even the social stigma. If your coworkers see you smoking a joint, they'll be like, "Oh, he's a hippie. Right. He listens to Pink Floyd, and he doesn't ever move from the silliness." But, I mean, so I don't know. It's just the fact that nicotine is so dangerous because of the other chemicals that come along with smoking. It seems crazy to me that because AA people seem to be generally, it's not okay to treat your alcohol addiction by going home and smoking weed or taking mushrooms or something. That's not considered okay, right?
Yeah.
But you can treat your addiction by smoking a pack a day, right?
No, you can't. I don't think you can treat it that way.
Well, I mean, but isn't that what people are doing?
I don't think they're equating it with treating it.
No, there's because that would
I
just
worded
be
it wrong. Yeah,
that would
it's
just
not
be
an
replacing
official treatment, but don't people replace it? Don't people do that a lot? Isn't there a lot of smoking among recovering alcoholics?
I think some people replace meetings with drinking. And then they're addicted to meetings, and they have to go to meetings all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and I say that because a friend of mine started going to AA, and I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I never saw him have any sort of problems with drugs or alcohol. the couple years before he went to AA, I didn't even know if he drank or anymore.
It was like Fight Club.
And then
they got addicted to the meetings.
A lot of our friends started going because they actually had problems. And then he started going, I think, because of the social event. Because he wasn't really... He was just working pretty much and not really doing anything else. So then he would go with his friends to the meetings and hang out and talk and, meet people and whatever. And then that's what he was doing. And me saying that, I understand that it's not as bad.
There's nothing harmful about going
to meetings, unless you're missing work and not hanging out with your kids or stuff like that. I mean, there still could be if you.
Well, I kind of want to make a comparison too. I mean, I think the ideologies are completely different, but I feel like if you just pick any church or any religion and you just have a guy who hangs out with them, they're just, oh yeah, I'm hanging out with my buddy who's a Catholic over here. They're doing a Catholic thing. You know what I mean? It's not like a. It's not like a bad thing necessarily, what I mean, or anything like that. Yeah.
So you don't see a lot of smoking and coffee drinking?
Oh no, I think that. I mean, yeah, I mean it is a stereotype, absolutely. But I don't think it's a replacement. I mean, I'm sure some people would answer you differently, but I haven't been a smoker for 4 or 5 years. But I mean, it's funny you bring that up because in the beginning I smoked a lot. You know what I mean? I was I was just super anxious and rigid and trying not to leak on myself. It's just
they just told me not to quit smoking at the same time you're trying to quit drinking.
Yeah, I mean, you do hear
get
that.
Your legs under you first.
Just too exactly. Much.
Yeah, before you start punching yourself in the face with that kind of anxiety.
But I also don't think that there's in my instance, I needed to stop drinking. You know what I mean? The cigarettes and the coffee. Afterwards.
You could stop.
Yeah, it wasn't like a super big deal, and there was just no replacement or whatever.
So that seems to tip it back towards it's the alcohol, it's the substance itself that is addictive to addicts. I think we were. I was at least leaning away
I don't think
towards
it's a substance. I think it's just there's not as much of a social stigma against smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee.
No, but
you're still addicted. You're still just as addicted to cigarettes.
No, you're not. You're not because you don't steal to buy cigarettes, and he was able to stop just on his own when he was ready.
John,
but not with alcohol.
I've known people that steal to get cigarettes. Yeah. They'll steal money to get cigarettes, or they'll go to the store and steal cigarettes.
So if you were to look up any of these A's right now, they have a nicotine anonymous, they have a caffeine, and they have a whole spectrum, for it.
This is the funniest thing. We saw an ad last night for Clutter Anonymous.
Yeah.
Guess where it meets?
What's that?
At the Tanque Verde swap meet. Are you fucking kidding me? That's like having the porn addiction group meet at 10s, right? You're like, yeah, we're going to meet at 10s. It's happy hour. There's going to be some AA guys there, too, for the dollar paps, right? It's
No, but I don't disagree with you that some people are addicted to cigarettes in that way. But I'm saying that there's a lot of people who are addicted to alcohol in that way, but not cigarettes in that way. Right? So if he drinks a drink, presumably he's going to drink a lot more. Pretty much that's his problem. But if he smokes a cigarette right now, he's probably just going to cough and feel like shit and not care about smoking another cigarette.
Totally.
No, completely. It depends. It's dependent on the individual.
Meaning, in individuals, the substance itself has some role.
Has a bearing.
Well,
That I'll buy because as I took stuff off my list, it would take an event where I realized, I can't do this shit in moderation. It has to come off my list because I act a fool. So that's why my list generally, it got narrowed down to what it is. It was from bad experience myself and realizing, when you do this, you can't control it because you like the way that feels.
Right.
So and there's all kinds of factors that fit into what you're addicted to. Like I smoked a cigarette when I was in 6th grade, and it did nothing for me, except for what you said. It made me cough and feel like crap. So I was like, I'm not going to smoke this. Yeah. And the same day, I smoked a joint. I actually got high, so I'm like, I'm going to smoke this.
Yeah.
And so then that's what I did for the next.
You're like, I got to smoke something. It's 7th grade.
You want to fit in, you want to be cool, whatever.
Sure.
So I did. I smoked weed for the next couple of years, and then the summer before I went into high school, I was like, I have to stop smoking this stuff because all I want to do is sit on the couch.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Brian, you were saying
I
something.
never liked any of those downers either. You could have given me any opiates all day long. I never wanted it because I didn't want to go that way. It was never going to, as addictive as those things are,
Right.
they were never going to be a problem for me.
Right.
Yeah, I've had some Vicodin prescriptions and stuff, and I gotta say, I do like it. I do like those drugs. They make me like energetic for like an hour, and then they make me really calm and like that. If you take like 3 of them or something, it's dangerous, of course, but you like nod off, and you start to see what these heroin guys are into because they start like nodding, but you're in that like hypnagogic state between waking and dreaming. And it's kind of like wacky and fun.
Yeah, I only like it when I'm in a lot of pain. Like other
Yeah.
than that, I don't dig that.
It's good for pain, and the weird thing is it doesn't really stop the pain.
No,
it
helps you
just
check
puts you
out.
in a good
Yeah,
mood.
You just check out.
And then it's loaded with ibuprofen and stuff, which actually does help pain.
Yeah, it kills that
But
inflammation.
still, you're doing that as a pretty minimal user. Like if you started doing it every day, in a couple
that's
months,
just that's physiology. You're
right.
going to end up
a couple
Yeah,
months,
it's a
you might be like,
yeah.
oh, and then you might be
It's a
making poor life
yeah.
choices or doing other stuff
Yeah.
because of it.
Yeah,
because then
definitely.
physiologically you're
It's
going to be
physiologically
addicted. You'll
addicted.
have
Right.
to taper
Right.
off under medical supervision, or you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I was trying to get to again is just that the cigarette smoking and the coffee drinking is not as much of a social stigma as drinking booze or taking drugs or anything like that. So it's not considered as much an addiction. People don't look at it in the same way. Even if they say, oh yeah, I'm addicted to cigarettes, they're not going to lose their job because they're smoking cigarettes. They're not going to get divorced because they're smoking cigarettes, most likely.
Well, do you know that
They're not
TMC
gonna-
won't hire you if they know that you smoke?
Well,
If they
no,
know
the-
that you smoke, they won't hire
Right.
you.
Wow.
Period. They
the-
tell you if you smoke, we're not hiring you.
And that's
Jeez.
that's getting to be more like that. Just with like the passing of you can't smoke in bars now, you can't smoke in lots of restaurants. Can't. So the social stigma is increasing on smoking, not increasing on coffee drinking though.
No. No.
Guys, the
No, there's like 2
or
Starbucks
candy
at
or
TMC. Like, it's
reading
100%
the Bible
not.
or any
you
kinds of things.
you can't have a comprehensive discussion about alcohol in this country and not talk about Native Americans. So if wasn't trying to be funny.
Racist.
Hey, it is largely in some ways an urban legend.
What do you call a white guy surrounded by 10 Indians? Bartender.
And that makes the cut.
That hurt my soul, Beef. It did. Like, it right down to my fucking soul, that hurt.
Oh boy.
Well, here's the actual statistics on it, okay? Native Americans are actually less likely to drink alcohol than white people or other ethnic groups in this country, but they're more likely to binge drink, and they're 4 times more likely to die from drinking. And
fetal alcohol syndrome is a huge...
yeah, that's a big part of it.
It's a huge deal.
So what it is with them is that in the Native American community, there's a lot more binge drinking, problem drinking, and less normal drinking. And they've done the genetic studies, and it's very wishy-washy. There's really no certain genetic marker in Native Americans or any other race that makes them susceptible to alcohol. There's some interesting genetic stuff going on there that might mean they're a little more susceptible, but in other words, it doesn't explain.
I have a thought.
Well, what about...
Well,
They're that rat in that cage, man.
it's
Well,
the
yeah,
rat in the
that's
cage.
Stuck on the fucking reservation.
Stuck on the
There's nothing to
reservation
do
with
out there. There's
no
nothing
future,
to
really.
do
Sure.
out there.
Culture has been
They
annihilated.
took it away from. We took everything away from them.
But
As
then-
you know, I'm still deep into this. We took everything away from them.
And that's part
This
of
is
why I
never
brought it
how
up.
they lived. This is never how they wanted to live. This is never how they were meant to live. It was forced upon them at all costs. Like do it the white man's way, or we're gonna fucking bury you like we did everybody else, like we did all the Eastern tribes. They knew it was coming,
Right.
and they've been forced onto these reservations. And there's nothing out. You ever been out there, man? There's nothing out there.
Right.
There's nothing for them to do. There's no stimulation, and that's why it
it's
happens.
like-
It's a fucking tragedy on top of a tragedy on top of more tragedies. That whole story makes me ashamed to be a human being, man. It does.
I don't know if you heard the recent thing about the Grand Canyon, but president of the Navajo Nation up there, they want to basically put in a hotel and possibly a roller coaster, or I don't know. Like.
Well, they want to put in a resort, like a resort
at
city.
the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
Well, I think it's at the top, actually. It's
no, it's at the bottom.
At the bottom.
The article that I read was about at the bottom, and they're for it because it's going to create jobs. It's going to create stuff for them there. I mean, you would think that they'd.
Has anybody but me ever been down in the Grand Canyon?
Yeah.
Anybody? You have been down there?
Not in it.
Have you been down?
Yeah.
Okay, I figured you had. Crazy fucker. But it's I hope that never happens, man.
Right.
It's that you're going to ruin one of the 7 wonders of the natural world if you.
Like, if they mess up Havasu Pie, that'd just be awful.
Yeah, it's.
You know?
I don't think it was. I think it's down other place.
Are they talking about where the Phantom Ranch is, like in that area?
Possibly, I think so.
That would be the logical spot,
Right.
but that would
And-
also be horrible.
So this propensity for Native Americans to binge drink and die from it really points to the environmental, sociological aspects of addiction to me.
It sure does to me.
Well, I think the binge drinking for sure. But I have a question about how they process the alcohol might be part of the problem too, just in the same way that like fast food and stuff like that. It doesn't seem like.
So you're
Native
saying there's a
Americans-
physiological aspect that we don't understand.
Yeah, I think so because
The same reason they have a propensity for diabetes.
Right.
And so it's the sugar.
Right.
Is it the sugar?
It could be. I don't know, but they've done a lot of. Like I said, they've done genetic studies, and the thing about genetics, for all of us, sort of grew up around the 80s, 90s period where they were gradually unlocking the human genome, and there were billions of dollars of investments into the biotech industry. It was one of the most notorious bubbles that eventually popped. And the idea was once we map this human genome, we're going to have the keys to everything. All diseases, all behaviors, we're going to understand. We're going to link them to genes. So the Human Genome Project did it, mapped it. It was, I think, 1999, 2000. They finished it. And that's when that bubble collapsed because all of a sudden they realized this doesn't get us anywhere. This does not explain behaviors. It doesn't explain diseases. Some of them do. There are some things that are some diseases that are just, bam, genetic. Here's this gene. If it's on, you have it. If it's off, you don't. Red hair, stuff like that. But no, behaviors and all this stuff was not explained by the human by genes. And alcohol is another example of that. And you'll hear a lot of urban myths about Native Americans, and they have the gene, and as soon as the alcohol touches their lips, they go insane. It's pretty much not true. Although there probably are some physiological factors here, because you have things like epigenetics where even 2 generations, a father to son, now we know that the way the father lives can affect genetic outcomes on the son. It used to be thought that your behavior doesn't influence your genes at all, but it's now known that it does. Behavior and environment affects genes. So like if you lift weights your whole life, even though you're born like a skinny, weak guy, and you get really big, that there's a chance that epigenetically that will have an effect on your son or daughter's stature. So they might be bigger and more muscular just as a result of stuff you did during your life rather than genetic factors. So
I wonder too if it's a historical thing where we are just witnessing right now alcohol moving through this culture at such a rampant rate, because maybe in the 20s it wasn't such a big deal, it
was illegal in the 20s.
In the maybe the 30s, then 30s or 40s it was moving through maybe like rich white type of people, you know what I'm saying? And then maybe through the 60s and 70s it was moving through African American communities.
I don't know. Alcohol though, it's deep in the European history. So it was already people drank beer in the Middle Ages instead of water because the alcohol in the beer would kill a lot of the bacteria. You couldn't get clean water back then. So when you hear about in the 1300s, the German beer fests clinking their mugs and stuff, yes, they drank beer all day. It was 1% alcohol, so it didn't really get you drunk. You could actually hydrate by continuing to drink it, which you can't do with 5 or 6% beer. It's dehydrating. But yeah, they used to drink beer all day long, literally, instead of water, because they would die if they drank the shitty poisonous water with the floating horse parts in it from their medieval well. But so I think alcohol has been a really big part of European American life for a long time. So I don't know if that's it. And I think I was wrong when I said it was illegal in the 20s. I believe it was 1930 to 39 that it was illegal, or 20 to 29. And someone out there is screaming at me right now.
It was in the 20s.
It was 9 years.
Yeah, it was in the 20s.
Yeah. I mean, they were still drinking though. That's
Definitely.
I mean, like the
yeah.
full flapper, like just
yeah.
because they were still drinking. You know,
I think
And
that
thus-
just as much.
And then blooms the American mafia.
That's how
they blossomed.
Organized crime.
Well, that's how
Prohibition.
Joseph Kennedy made all his money. To then have
a
the Kennedy
bootlegger?
family be. Yeah, he was a bootlegger.
Yeah, organized crime came as a result, and the FBI was formed as a result of that to fight organized crime.
I still think I don't even. I mean, all respect, but I don't think it's hitting this culture at a certain time. Although maybe it is, because you think about it, they're less than what it was 1900. Really, they were pretty much now are all confined to reservations. That generation, the last free Native Americans, are dying out. So then there's one generation between these guys really and them, right? So they don't even know what their culture is supposed to be like. Where did they haven't been able to, they don't have time to fully assimilate to our culture yet in 2 generations. You can't do that, man.
And they...
Not from a culture so foreign to ours. It was so foreign to ours.
Yeah.
right.
And to assimilate within, so they're lost as a people, man. I totally agree with and I know this is a recurring theme with John Berger is the socioeconomic, like that's where so many of the problems come from. It goes back to that
Poverty,
environment and
growing up-
opportunity and stimulation and
If your mother's a drug addict or your father's a male prostitute,
but I believe it in this case.
gonna make your life shitty.
It is. We put him in this spot, and that's just one more shitty aspect of it.
Yeah, it is like I think you're touching on something interesting that we need to get a Native American on here. And living in Tucson, we can do that. We know a lot of people with Native heritage.
Well, I'll be looking this summer in Montana too. So, like, maybe I'll bring somebody down if I can find somebody up there.
Because there's a fundamental clash. It's almost strange. Like I'm speaking out of school here, but like with slavery, we forced that community to integrate into our way of doing things, and after slavery, especially, we still held them down, but the whole idea was like, get jobs and live in the society. They didn't have any connection to the African culture,
Right.
So, but with Native Americans, it's not quite the same. They're still in the place where they were before we came, but just in a much tinier.
Well, most of them have been
in.
moved off there where they used to
Yeah.
be. So
And there's just something
we
about
needed those places for gold and
Yeah,
cattle
we'd always
and,
find something new.
gold,
when we
cattle.
moved to-
They had
right.
the best land.
No, we wanted for that. But the one thing I was going to say was I don't disagree with you about socioeconomics being integral to the problems that a lot of people face. But at the same time, there are rich people that have tons of problems, at least mentally, or depression, emotionally, or whatever. And there's poor people that don't,
That are
live
fine.
happy lives.
Are there?
And
you always got stats though. Are the stat like what's the? I doubt there's the same correlation though.
Well,
as-
there's
as
so
to-
many more poor people than there
Yeah.
are rich that
Yeah.
actually the representation
It's probably equal then,
in
thinking
AA.
about it.
Yeah, it is. It's about representative of the actual population.
That makes more sense if I just think about math, which obviously is hard for me to do.
Yeah, and they've done studies on the effectiveness of AA, and completely inconclusive because there's so many difficult factors in there for scientific study. For instance, the people in AA might be much more motivated to quit than addicts who aren't in AA. So they can't really get a good read on how well it works, and also the people in AA might be more severe addicts than the people not in AA, or the other way around. And so they can't control for those factors. So there's really no good studies on how effective AA is. So I looked all that up, and there's just no answer. We're almost done here for the day, but this is another source of controversy in 12-step programs. It's this idea of a higher power. And a lot of atheists and agnostics have a big bone to pick with this. To me, like, the language is so vague, and there's so much room for interpretation that it doesn't bother me. And of course, I'm not an atheist, but I think it's like the militant atheists that really they chaps their ass that they're supposed to believe in some kind of higher power So how important has that been to you? And if you want to share what that word or phrase means to you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And thanks for taking time too to like research kind of into like what this is about. I mean, it's good to talk about, right? Well, the first thing I want to say is that in recovery groups there are atheist groups. Period.
Rational recovery, if it comes to mind right away.
No, I'm even talking about 12-step recovery programs where it's an atheist group. I'll never forget I was in a meeting in LA. It was actually after I fought in a tournament and I had gotten beat in like the second round or something. Or no, the first round, and I had to go back and fight the next day. And I was just so down and out, you know. And so I was like, all right, I'm feeling well, I'm going to go to me, I'm going to check, you know, whatever. Yeah. So I go and it's this atheist meeting and I had no idea. And like I'm like talking about God. And they're just like shaking their head, and and I felt really bad, you know. And I was like, okay, and that was earlier on, but it was really funny. So, just to put that out there, and there is literature that exists around that stuff with 12-step programs. But to answer your question, how it works for me is it's an evolving kind of thing, and I think it's important. There had to be some sort of power that I could live by, and that could maybe help me with my problem, and I found that in the people in the rooms of recovery, period.
Right.
You know,
the group is the higher power.
The group. And I want to be very clear and specific when I say the group. And what I mean by that is the people who came before me who have somehow, when I relate to them, they've been able to stay sober for long amounts of time. And not only just stay sober, but they've been able to live happy lives. Like you mentioned, I had a son. I have another one on the way. Yeah. You know, I'm in a fairly happy marriage. You know, we've bought a house and bought a car. You know, like normal people things, right? You would say, and like
that's not a normal people house, dude. That's awesome.
That's a whole nother story.
That's
a whole nother wild set of circumstances. Yeah. But so for me, like when I was new, I would have told you it was like, oh, I gotta believe in some power that's like in the clouds. But like really, to be very like matter of fact, is like there's this group of people who have come before me, because you can take that to a whole different level. I mean, in some ways, I consider my heart a power greater than myself. I go to sleep and don't tell it to keep beating; it just does. You know what I mean? Like my body just functions. You know, I'm not telling my liver to process, and so I can wake up and be alive.
Nature,
nature, right? You know, there's all sorts of different things. So I think.
Well, that's nature. That's physiological. It's biology, man.
Yeah, and so I think like I'll tell you why I think these programs work, is there's no dogma. It's not a dogmatic thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, you know, you may have some certain reflection you need to do, if you will. You may have some sort of, you know, making things right, just normal people things, but there's no like, you know, okay, you got to show up this many times for it to work. You have to light this candle before you say this.
Jesus
thing.
Christ is my Lord and Savior.
And throughout all the literature, all the prayers that you find, I mean, it's very clear that like you don't have to say exactly what is in there, what is comfortable to you, and it says specifically your community.
Honestly, to me, man, it's just another example of how atheism can mimic dogmatic religion sometimes, man. When they like Doug Stanhope, the comedian, like this is such a sticking point for him. He hates the fact that just this phrase, the higher power. And to me, it's like, it's just a phrase, dude, and they're offering it so loosely. It's so loose. Like it can be the group, the higher power. It can be the meetings. It can be your own body,
or whatever.
Yeah, it can be Jesus, Allah,
Allah, Buddha, yeah.
And some atheists that are so turned off by the process just because they have that phrase. To me, it's like, come on, guys, like. Just make the higher power be the number 2 pencil in your pocket. Just skip that part, you know. Like,
I wasn't sure what I believed then.
Yeah,
I was kind of trying the world on still, and I didn't understand that part. That's what I wanted to ask you about. When people tell me, I'd be like, man, I'm all fucking tied up over this, or I'm freaked out about that, and somebody would say to me, man, you got to let go and let God. And I had no fucking idea what that meant. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, how does that work for me on a day-to-day basis? Like when I'm sitting in my room at night freaking out because I want to do this or I think I've ruined my life, how does let go and let God work for me.
Well, it's good advice, but they don't tell you how.
Right.
In other words, letting go of control, it's for a lot of us is a big problem, myself included.
But I didn't get that.
Right.
And I was so angry then that when you would tell me something like that, it would just make me more angry. I'd just go home and be like, what is that stupid old bastard talking about? He's telling me to let go and let God. I call that fool for advice.
Right, right. No, no, absolutely. And I think it's experiential. It's because for instance, when I was explaining to you about the powerlessness in the jail, right? Like I had that all come to me in reflection, if you will, like while I was sitting in one of these 12-step meetings when I was 2 years sober. So it just hit me like, oh my God, I understand why it's more clear now. So I wouldn't just be some sort of, if you will, like a slogan slinger or something you know what I mean? Like it had some depth and meaning. And
so for you to realize that for you, like the higher power was the group, it took you a while. Like you didn't just be like, oh yeah, the higher power is the group.
Oh no, exactly.
It took you a while to suddenly, you had a moment of reflection where you're like, oh, well, I know why this is working for me.
Absolutely.
I know where it got to me.
Yeah, most certainly. And the thing is like earlier on, I would have told you it meant different things to me. I would have told you it meant like avoiding prison. There was some sort of power, or I would have told you it was when I was reunited with my dad after 30 years, finding out he lived a mile away from me when I thought he lived across the country,
Crazy.
Like these crazy, these crazy sort of stories that happen, But really, to boil it down and to be able to talk to people across the board, some guy who's just coming in who's having a problem drinking, I'm not trying to sell you something. I'm just trying to tell you, look, man, there's this group of people who've come before us who have found a way to live. And here's the idea, can you just be open-minded about it?
Right.
And that's really all that boils down to is just like, can you be open-minded to the possibility that there's some power that may work for you in your life? Or are you so far gone that it's not going to work? So as once that open-mindedness kind of clicks, then I think after you've identified yourself as someone who belongs in the 12-step program, then you go forward from there.
Well, guys, that's a good way to sum it up, and we got to end it because people are being tortured by how long this is because they love it so much, but they have other shit to do. So we got to keep it short as we can. Coming up, we're gonna have Bricktop Brent, one of the coolest punk rock hardcore dudes in Tucson and a big influence on me. He's coming up in a couple weeks. We're going to have Ray. He's going to tell us about corners of a life and experience that I certainly have no idea about. And I can't wait to get his opinions on. I don't know how to explain it, but let's just say Ray's been through a lot. He's been to prison and stuff like that. He's been shot several times. And so we're going to talk to him. Next week, we have Katie. How do you say her last name?
Rogers.
Katie Rogers is going to be on the podcast. And she is a lawyer and I believe a self-described feminist. And so by popular demand, we're going to finally have a female voice on the show. And we're going to learn from her and discuss a bunch of different things, issues I have with feminism, ways in which I admire feminism, and then a host of other topics related to gender and maybe law and other things that she's an expert on. So I can't wait to have her next Sunday. And please listen to New Music Sound Circus. You can find it on SoundCloud. It's 10 new songs every Sunday, hosted by my buddy Bo. And the songs really are good. Like, if you find yourself needing to hear some new music in your life, like I find myself, throw it on. New Music Sound Circus, some really good stuff. Anyone else have anything to say or add or plug?
I won't be here next week for Katie. I'm a little bummed, but we're doing I run a local hiking group, the Sandhill Crane Adventure Team. SCAT.
Sandhill Crane Adventure Team.
Yeah, you can check us out on Facebook, and we're doing a memorial hike in the Chiricahua National Monument for Charlie Burnt next week.
Charlie was
the
really
first
good guy.
annual. Charlie was a good guy.
Yeah.
So.
Anything else? Anything, Aaron?
I was at the International Wildlife Museum the other day, and I was sizing up this grizzly. What kind of choke? Or would you go for triangle, or would you try to take the back, or Kimura? I don't think you can armbar it.
Never even try it. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
just curious.
If I got to go for something, I want to take the back because you don't want to be under him.
All right, I was thinking.
Can you get your arm around the neck?
That
of
you,
grizzly?
I think you could.
Well, they call it
so?
Mata
The one
Leone.
at the International Wildlife Museum, yes.
Okay.
They call it Mata Leone. It's a lion killer. It might work on a grizzly.
One rake of those claws
It might.
on your arm,
Right,
and that
right.
flesh is
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
Or Gigantopithecus. We could talk about him again.
There you go.
You guys should look that thing up.
I did. It
Bigfoot
fucking
is real.
frightened me, dude.
Bigfoot is real.
Is real. I don't know if he's still alive, but he was real.
And he's 3 times the size of Harold.
Guys, thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Later.
Later.
Happy Greek Easter.
That.